here together for a couple hours to talk about essential documents or documentation in clinical trials for the research sites. And I'll abbreviate some things, so if I don't define them, please let me know. Like EDs, sometimes I'll just use instead of essential documents just to save space. So we know that essential documents, the reason they're so important and why we do a lot of classes on them, is they are the pieces that demonstrate compliance. And in this case, we're talking about at the research site. But you'll see the first statement on slide 3, and is probably why sponsors and CROs come to these classes, is the documentation at site, those essential documents, not only represent the site's, the investigator's compliance to the strictest rule or their GCPs, but also how the sponsor monitoring and other sponsor activities fulfilled their obligations related to their interactions with the sites. So definitely you'll see that when, for example, a site is audited by a regulatory authority, the outcome can reflect the appropriateness or the compliance of the monitoring, and also even with data and all sorts of things. So, and in this class we go over device and drugs, so we incorporated it together. And so it's important for us to think about essential documents as subject-specific documents, for example, the supporting source data, case report form, but there's a lot of essential documents that we'll go over today that are non-subject specific. And we sometimes call these at the research site that they are filed in what's called the site regulatory binder, the investigator file, project file. It depends on what we all call it for that trial. Now this is a quote from the FDA on slide 4. That FDA was interviewed in the UK, and they discussed their recent modernization of their inspection program, which they officially announced in 2006. And they said, when we inspect research investigators, we pay attention to the big 5 areas where investigators go wrong. And you'll notice these 5 areas, and the first one is really interesting. It's the first to be put down, falsification and fraud, and they are finding more representations of this or examples of this. And I'm not sure if it's because they're inspecting more and whatnot, but then also supervision of the study and delegation of responsibilities, a big focus of the agency, so supervision of the investigator. And we really look for that through essential documentation. And some of it's subject-related, a specific subject, but much of it is like in delegation logs and credentialing, et cetera, that we'll talk about today. And boy, essential documentation is all about communication between stakeholders. So sponsor, investigator, IRB, or IEC for global. So this so important on all the management that goes back and forth and the correspondence that both parties or sets of groups do adequate documentation. So record keeping and really retention of records and documentation. And then ALCOA. So we'll touch on ALCOA just a little bit today. We have a separate course on adequate and accurate source documentation. But the key elements of data quality and integrity. And these are really principles that can be applied to the non-subject specific documents also. So ALCOA meaning, again, attributable, legible, contemporaneous, original, and accurate. So think of, as we move through this course, how would we meet these requirements, or these attributes for a non-subject specific or subject-specific essential document. So learning objectives today. We're going to define clinical research EDs, and then determine essential subject and non-subject. We'll really go through the different stages of a trial. So before this trial starts, during, and post-trial. And then drug versus device versus what would you see in a combination product essential file for the site. And This is all about preparing for regulatory inspection proactively. And then also when we need to react to deficiencies, what should we see in essential documentation? So we'll go over that a lot today.